Okay, if we could have everybody come on down and sit, that would be fantastic. Welcome to winter, 8 below on my thermometer this morning, but somebody corrected me on, it was like 28 below or something like that. Windshield, yeah. So I don't know if you can really count that, but just don't get a flat tire, whatever you do today. But I want to welcome everybody back from last night. Thank you for braving the cold, and it's just great to have everybody back. So the goal in what we're doing is we're trying to understand God's design for marriage and then apply that to our marriages. Is that close to what? That's pretty close. Okay, good. And I'd say the second part, the applying part, is probably the harder part, but in His strength, we can do it. In His strength, we can do it. So a couple of things I want to mention. We do have a backdrop for taking pictures. Goose and Annie, can you raise your hand here? They would love to take your picture, and they'll probably recruit you as well. But please do that. The other thing I want to mention is that we will be doing a drawing. The 3 pictures that you see on that backdrop, we will be giving those away, and I'll be doing that in the middle of this morning. We'll be doing that. But you have to be here in order to get to win the drawing. So if I draw your name, you're not here, you're out of luck, because we are not going to send them in the mail. You are going to take them home today. So there we go on that. So yeah, it's a joy to have Joel and Pam to lead us this morning. And so if you guys would come on up after they sing a song or two, I think just one, then Pastor Brian will be coming on up. So thank you so much.
Good morning, everybody. What gift of grace is Jesus my Redeemer? There is no more for heaven now to give. He is my joy, my righteousness and freedom, my steadfast love, my deep and boundless peace. To this I hold, my hope is only Jesus, for my life is wholly bound to His. Oh, how strange and divine, I can sing all is mine, yet not I, but through Christ in me. The night is dark, but I am not forsaken, for by my side the Savior He will stay. I labor on in weakness and rejoicing, for in my need His power is displayed. To this I hold, my shepherd will defend me. Through the deepest valley He will lead. Oh, the night has been won, and I shall overcome, yet not I, but through Christ in me. No fate I dread, I know I am forgiven. The future sure, the price it has been paid. For Jesus bled and suffered for my pardon, and He was raised to the grave. To this I hold, my sin has been defeated. Jesus now and ever is my plea. The chains are released, I can sing, I am free, yet not I, but through Christ in me. With every breath I long to follow Jesus, for he has said that he will bring me home. And day by day I know he will renew me, until I stand with joy before the throne. To this I hold, my hope is only Jesus. All the glory evermore to him. When the race is complete, still my lips shall repeat, yet not I, but through Christ in me. When the race is complete, still my lips shall repeat, yet not I, but through Christ in me. Yet not I, but through Christ in me. Great singing. You may be seated.
Good morning. Oh, wow, that's really good. All right, so just a quick word about some of the resources we have at the table we thought might be helpful. One is a children's series, 5 books. There's one more coming. There'll be 6 in the series, called The Land of Ott. So the kids go out to Grandma Cookie's house. They go through the chicken coop, end up in the land of Ott. The land of Ott, as the world as God intended it to be, so the world as it ought to be. That's where the name comes from. So basically, they learn that God created it good, now it's broken, and so it helps them work through the thing back home. So then each book has a different theme. The point of the book is trying to help parents establish a Christian worldview in their kids. So each book has some sort of a theme that's related to cultivating Christian worldview. Like, where does right and wrong come from, and how come hard things have to happen, and things like that. So Patty can help you if you want further explanation. These have been wildly popular. Every weekend at church, I've got kids attacking me wanting to know when the next one's coming out. A lot of grandparents buy them for their grandkids. So this has been fun. About half of these, my daughter's the illustrator, and the other half, a buddy of mine. This is geared toward the topic later this morning. Basically, it's God's view on sex. Warren Wiersbe did one of the endorsements, and he calls it a theology of sex. So that's pretty much what it is. Great with young people, college students, really helpful for married couples. There's just so much confusion on this, and the one voice we need to hear is God's voice. So that's what Ultimate to Me is about. And then probably in the top 2 or 3 issues I've faced with people over my 40 plus years as a pastor is ultimately what people are struggling with is their view of God is messed up. And as long as that's true, nothing else is going to work in their Christian lives. And almost always it roots back to their family of origin, the family they grew up with, things they experienced, projected that onto God, and don't even know that. So whether you understand this or not, it's impossible to leave your family of origin without having formed a view of God. The only question is, was that view correct or incorrect? And so it's complicated because everybody's story is unique and different. So the way the book is written is it walks you through your own story and helps you assess what you should have experienced, what you actually experienced, and identify areas where your view of God may be off and help you work toward a more accurate view of God. So those are the 3 resources we have. So I think ever since, like, I was in middle school on, I always dreamed of having a marriage license. I remember in high school, I just couldn't wait one day to obtain a marriage license. All through college, I kept wondering, is that a girl I could share a marriage license with? Finally, when I met Patty, she's like, I think this might be the one. This might be the one I can share a marriage license with. I remember the day of our wedding, I got up that morning thinking, this is the day. I remember standing at the altar thinking, let's get this over with so we can go in the pastor's office. He'll sign it, and I'll have a marriage license. I remember on our wedding night, Patty looked lovely, and I said to her, honey, let's go to Walmart. Let's get a frame. Let's hang the marriage license. Are you buying any of this? No. No, of course not. Nobody gets married to obtain a marriage license. The desire is to enter into a lifelong love relationship with someone. So it is with our relationship with God. Salvation was never meant to be a ticket to heaven. It's an invitation to dance with God. It's an invitation to experience this loving, intimate relationship with Him. Marriage is intended to be a picture, the ultimate love story of that experience with God. So if the purpose of the family is to pass on a right view of God, at the center of that is marriage. And marriage is meant to be a picture of that love story. So kids get a sense of, if that's what it looks like, then that's something I want. So they leave home having formulated a right view of God. So when we start to talk about biblical roles in marriage, some people have a reaction to that. Sometimes the reaction to that is because of something you experienced. Maybe what you experienced growing up. And it's helpful to understand you should react to that. If what you experienced was hurtful or offensive, it's like that's creating a warped view of God. We shouldn't accept that. But it sometimes is also hard to process because we confuse what I'm going to call traditional roles with biblical roles. And that creates a lot of confusion that can be off-putting to people. So just before I explain that further, it is helpful to go back to the research. So going back to Brad Wilcox's research, and Nancy Pearcey has a ton of research in her book about masculinity that reveals that ultimately, of all the married couples out there in America, those men and women who rate the highest satisfaction in marriage are conservative, evangelical, Bible-believing, church-attending Christians. The reason I say it that way is because the statistics are really skewed when you're including people that on a census would check Christian. They really don't live that life out in any way. So by church attending, they're defining that as at least 3 times a month. So really what we would understand to be a committed Christian. The statistics are about 74% would consider themselves in a highly desirable marriage, which is quite a bit higher than any other group. So again, it reflects this idea that God's word is like a roadmap to flourishing. If we just listen to him and do it his way, just the research itself shows this is the roadmap to a flourishing marriage. One more thing to add to that. I know oftentimes you hear, like us as preachers, say something like the divorce rate among Christians is just as high as it is in the secular world. And that is true if you're counting Christians in the broadest sense as those who checkmark that on a census. If you narrow it down to what we would consider committed Christians, conservative, evangelical, Bible-believing, church-attending Christians, it is the lowest category of divorce rate of all categories by a considerable margin, which again just reflects the idea that if we choose to listen to God and travel his path, that is the pathway to flourishing. So let's talk about these roles a little bit because it does get confusing. When we talk about traditional roles, those of us that are older can think back to TV shows like Ozzie and Harriet and Leave It to Beaver and Andy Griffith. That's just where the culture was at. The man went out and worked, the lady stayed home. With Leave It to Beaver, she wears a dress and her nice jewelry, and she does the womanly things, and he does the manly things, and he runs the household, and she does what she's told. That's kind of the way it was back in those days. And so biblical roles were interpreted through that lens, which is unfortunate. As the culture began to change, there was a tendency within Christianity to try to continue to force people into those traditional roles, thinking those were biblical roles. And so all of a sudden it becomes something less than desirable at home. So wherever you're at on the subject, all I'd ask you to do is if you can kind of push the delete button and be open to what God has to say about what biblical roles are and not get them all tied up in traditional roles. I think the best way to think of it is like this. Our tendency is to always make everything about ourselves. And I think we all wrestle with that. So when we're talking about biblical roles, immediately we start get into doing and devaluing and oppression and all this stuff. Because it's all about us. But what if it isn't all about us? What if it's ultimately about God? What if God is saying, this is like a theatrical production, and I want the husband and the wife to rightly picture to their children and the people around them the most beautiful love story of all time. In order to do that, he's assigning parts. He's assigning roles. Husband, you represent this. Wife, you represent this. It's a beautiful theatrical production that at the end of the day rightly pictures this love story. That's basically what biblical roles are all about. It's not a way to organize things at home. It's a way to picture God at home. So our kids leave having formulated a right view of God. All right, so with that as my introduction, if you have a Bible with you, you turn to Ephesians chapter 5. Ephesians chapter 5 probably has the most thorough conversation around this topic. We're going to pick it up in verse 21, strangely enough. And I want to read through the end of the chapter, and then we'll go from there. As I read this, listen for basically what God is saying is I want the husband to picture this. I want the wife to picture that. It's fairly obvious, I would say, in the text. Verse 21, be subject to one another in the fear of Christ. Wives, be subject to your own husbands as to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ also is the head of the church, he himself being the Savior of the body. But as the church is subject to Christ, so also the wives ought to be to their husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself up for her, so that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, that he might present to himself the church in all her glory, having no spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she would be holy and blameless. So husbands ought also to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his own wife loves himself. No one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ also does the church, because we are members of his body. Now notice he quotes from Genesis chapter 2. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and shall be joined to his wife. The two shall become one flesh. This mystery is great, but I am speaking with reference to Christ and the church. Oh, that's what that is. Nevertheless, each individual among you also is to love his own wife, even as himself. And the wife must see to it that she respects her husband. So there's a lot in there, and we can't pick apart the whole passage. But it is worth noting that Paul does go back to Genesis 2, and we'll go back there in the next session, and says ultimately that is a picture of Christ and his church, but it is pictured in the relationship with the husband and wife. So that confirms our conclusion last night. So let's start with the role of the husband. It's very clear in this text that the role of the husband is to rightly represent Jesus. Jesus and his love for his church, his sacrificial love, to do what was necessary to create an environment where we as sinners could know forgiveness and flourish as the person God made us to be. So I define the biblical role of the husband is to die to himself to rightly represent the self-sacrificing love of Christ, to create an environment where his wife can flourish as the person God made her to be. There's a number of things that are specifically mentioned. I just pull them all together in that word flourish. Now, here in Ainsworth, Nebraska, you should be very familiar with what that word means because it's an ag term. Whether you're farming or you're dealing with livestock, you're constantly doing your best to create an environment where either the crop flourishes or the livestock flourish. That's the basic idea, is to picture Jesus and what he's done for us. So we're jumping in Ephesians chapter 5. No writer in the New Testament ever thinks you're going to jump in right in the middle of his book. So you always have to remember that. The assumption is always that you started at the beginning and you're reading your way through it. Most of Paul's epistles are front-loaded with doctrine and they're back-loaded with, now how do we apply this doctrine? And Ephesians is certainly written that way. So you have this beautiful description. Ephesians is one of my favorite New Testament letters because it's just so over the top in the beauty and the wonder of God's grace and what he has done for us. So you have all that deep, rich theology. And then when you get to chapter 5, it's okay, husbands, your job is to picture that at home. And you picture it to your children or to the people around you by how you love your bride, your wife, which is, she is the picture of the church. So think of it this way. When husbands tuck their children into bed at night, they should be able to say to their kids, kids, if you want to know how much Jesus loves you, just watch the way I love your mom. That's the assignment for every husband to rightly picture this at home. So it does include the concept of headship. So it says, as Christ is the head of the church. This is one of those places where there's potential to create unnecessary confusion. So what is meant by that? I grew up in the fundamentalist movement, so primarily grew up on the King James Bible. And when the King James is describing the qualifications for an elder, it says things like must rule well at home, must rule his family. You combine that with some confusion around traditional roles, and it often is a recipe that isn't a very good picture of Jesus. That's an unfortunate translation. The Greek word doesn't mean rule. What that means to us versus all the way back when the King James was translated, it's very different. It carries much more the idea of a manager. So think of it, what does a good manager do? A good manager isn't somebody that rules everybody. Good manager is somebody that learns the people that he or she is managing. What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? What are their skills? And how do I put them in a place where they can flourish? It's a win for everybody. That's much more reflective of the Greek word. So when we talk about headship, it's really important, again, to understand we're in chapter 5. Headship was introduced in chapter 1. I've never, ever read a commentary about the headship of Christ over his church that ever had the slightest negative thing to say. As a matter of fact, it's just the opposite. It is unimaginably glorious that the God of the universe has taken on this role of headship as Savior of the body. So it makes no sense when we get to chapter 5 to all of a sudden turn this into something negative. It's not negative. So rightly understood, I would say headship is the authority to fulfill his responsibility. It's the authority to fulfill his responsibility. It's basically the idea that one day as a husband, I am going to stand before God and I will be accountable for how well I did my job of representing Jesus at home and create an environment where Patty could flourish as the person God's made her to be. I'm accountable for that. Imagine if at your job you were given a very specific responsibility, but you were given no authority to carry out that responsibility. It just wouldn't be fair. You're being held accountable for changes you need to make, but you have no authority to make those changes. Ultimately, that would just be frustrating. So this is the reality of it. That's the part assigned to the husband. And he's been given the authority to carry out his responsibility, to create an environment where his wife can flourish as the person God made her to be. I think the best imagery of this idea of the husband's role, this idea of headship, is a business owner. So think of it this way. If you confuse the traditional roles, there are some couples where their personalities and talents just fit that. That's who he is, that's who she is. It's not really that big of a problem. But what do you do with a marriage with a husband who is more mild-mannered, kind of quiet, more of an introvert, who's married to a woman who is a dynamic leader with a strong personality? Part of what we have to wrestle with is going back to last night, Genesis 1:1. If there's a creator, God made her that way. So to think that at home she's supposed to stuff all that, so she's pretending to be something she's not. He's trying to pretend to be something he's not, because God made him that way too. That's where all of a sudden you often have some real struggles, is you have two people pretending to be something they're not, and it just becomes an exercise in frustration. But if you think about the imagery of a business owner, we have lots of business owners in our church in Lincoln. And I'll tell you, they come in all shapes and sizes. Some are strong, dynamic visionaries. They're strong leaders. High old silver, we're going to take the hill. So they have to figure out the kind of people they need to hire to run the business so it will work, to carry out the vision. But we also have a lot of them that they're kind of the brainiacs. They're the brains of the outfit. They invented something. They discovered something. They figured it out. And so they're pretty quiet, introspective. They have to hire people that carry out the leadership responsibilities and the marketing and can make this work. The issue is, at the end of the day, the business owner is still the business owner. If I'm a quiet, introspective, kind of brainiac kind of guy, and I hire some really dynamic leaders, at the end of the day, it's still not their business. If we cheat on our taxes and the IRS comes knocking, they're not knocking on their door. They're knocking on my door, because I'm the one that's going to be held accountable. As the business owner, I'm accountable for the culture we create. It's my job. So it's a much better imagery. Doesn't require a certain personality. There's a difference between headship and leadership. The husband does not have to be the strongest personality, doesn't have to be the strongest leader, doesn't have to be the most talented, however you define that. What they do need to be is humble and obedient, and through the personality they have as God has made them, accept the responsibility that this is my job to represent the love of Christ and create this environment so my wife can flourish. All right, so turn over to 1 Peter chapter 3. I find Peter has some helpful stuff on this. So again, we're picking this up halfway through Peter's letter. But in verse 7, he says, "You husbands, in the same way, live with your wives in an understanding way, as with someone weaker, since she is a woman, and show her honor as a fellow heir of the grace of life, so that your prayers will not be hindered." This is a very popular verse in our culture. But let's make sure we understand what's being said. So first of all, the idea of weaker. Literally, the Greek is a weaker vessel, and vessel is a reference to the body. So this is just pretty much common sense. In most marriages, doesn't have to be all of them, in most marriages, the husband's physically stronger than the wife. So we have a couple of ex-Husker volleyball players in our congregation, and I'm confident they are stronger than their husbands, and they're stronger than me. They could take me down in a minute. But let's just be honest, that's more the exception. You have to also understand this against the backdrop of a first century culture. I know there's people today that want to say that Jesus and Paul and Peter, they were all oppressive to women. The only way you could say that is if you have no idea what Jesus and Paul and Peter said, and you have no idea what the first century was like. Because the reality is, in the first century, a wife was considered a piece of property. And the husband had the freedom to do what was ever necessary to get her to do what he thought she should do. So literally, he could do about anything, and there was no consequence. So you imagine what that was like for these women who had no standing before the law, had no standing in court, really had no way to defend themselves. So it was extremely common that men intimidated and abused their wives to make them do what he wanted them to do. That was just common. So the idea of a weaker vessel is the idea that because he is stronger, in most cases, he can do that. One of the problems with intimidation is it does work. As a dad, I can intimidate my children, and as a husband, I can intimidate my wife. It does work. It just works for a while, and then it eventually destroys the relationship. What Peter is saying is absolutely revolutionary, unheard of in that culture. So when he says to live with your wives, just that alone was like, she's not a piece of property. This is a love story. You need to live with her. Even that alone was dramatic in an understanding way. It's a Greek word that means according to design. So this was revolutionary. Rather than me dominating and oppressing and taking advantage of the woman I'm married to, my assignment now as a Christian, what Peter's saying is the same thing Paul was saying, that previous way of treating your spouse is over. And now as followers of Jesus, it's time for significant change. And the change was to go to school to figure out who you're married to understand her, in order to create an environment where she can flourish as the person God's made her to be. That's what Peter is saying there. And show her honor. Honor is a Greek word that means value. That show her value, to value her for who she is, her personality, her talents, her gifts. What does it take for her to flourish? At the end of that verse, this is really interesting. It says to the husbands, if you don't listen to what I'm saying, God's not going to listen to you. You tell me how many verses in the Bible say God won't listen to your prayers. I don't know if there's another one. This is very rare. It just tells you how seriously God takes this. Essentially, God is saying, as husbands, we're representing God at home. And I'm asking you to represent me rightly. And if you won't do that, I don't want to listen to what you have to say. Just understand how seriously God takes this theatrical production at home. Okay, so that's the role of the husband. Back to Ephesians chapter 5. The role of the woman. Clearly, in this text, the role of the woman, so when it says, as to the Lord, in other words, she is representing the church, the bride of Christ, the wife of Christ, and how the church is supposed to respond to Jesus. So again, wives, when you tuck your children into bed at night, what you should be able to say to your kids is, kids, if you want to know how you should respond to Jesus, you just watch the way I respond to your dad. So it's helpful for both husband and wife to be very thoughtful about how they picture this at home to their children. So this does include the S word. Be subject, submission. So let me start here. Let's not make this something more than it is. It makes no sense to me that all of a sudden there's this uproar. There is no way to function in a civilized society without submission from all of us all the time. There's no other way to operate. If you own a business, you have to operate according to the rules and regulation. If you work for someone, you're submissive to those rules and expectations. Whatever you're doing, when you're driving over here, just coming to the conference, Charles decides it starts at 9. You're submitting to that. I'm the one talking right now. You're submitting to that. It's the way the world operates. So all of a sudden, this isn't unusual. Think about a wife who has strong leadership gifts, that works somewhere out in the marketplace, and has people under her that she manages. There is an expectation. Every day you're going to submit, because this is how we operate. This is your job. This is what you do. Does she think in the marketplace she's devaluing all those people with that expectation? It's like it feels really hypocritical to think it's okay out there. Why would it suddenly be oppressive at home? So don't go there. That's really not what we're talking about. But one other thing that I think is worth noting, you may have found it odd that I started reading in verse 21. The reason I did that is because the previous paragraph is talking about the fact that as members of the body of Christ, we are submissive to one another. What a terrible church it would be if Charles is the king and everybody just does what they're told. It's like there's nowhere in the Bible where that's the picture of the church. God's gifted all different people, and we all come together and we all submit to one another in order to make it work. That was the problem in Corinth, is the finger wanted to be a toe and the eye wanted to be an ear, and it was chaos. So that's what the discussion was. So verse 21 ends that discussion by saying, and be subject or submissive to one another in the fear of Christ. So Patty and I are both members of the body of Christ. So we're included in that. So to start with, I'm submissive to her, she's submissive to me. We're co-members of the body of Christ. Then you get to verse 22, wives, and if you look at your text, be subject is in italics. The reason it's in italics is because the Greek word isn't in that verse. Basically, the idea, this is your Greek grammar lesson for the day, the verb is in verse 21. It's just assumed in verse 22, which is common. That's the way they wrote. But another way of saying this, and that's why it's in italics, it's not actually there, it's just assumed. Another way of saying this is you couldn't interpret verse 22 without verse 21. Because you have to have verse 21 to get the verb in there. So basically, you can't even start this discussion we're about to have without first being aware, as members of the body of Christ, we're all submissive to one another. That's the heart and the humility and the attitude that define the body of Christ. Now we move into then what is the specific submission for the wife in the marriage? I think the specific submission is an acceptance of her husband's role. It's an acceptance of her husband's role. Ladies, your husband is going to be held accountable before God for how he did his job. Because you love him and you want that to go well. You cooperate. You need to help him, or he's never going to figure it out. It's like, this isn't about me. This is about an assignment to picture this love story at home, and we both need to do our part to rightly picture this love story at home. I don't want to read through the specifics, but again, it is worth noting this was all in place before the fall. Genesis 1 and 2, we talked about this last night, that the man and the woman were created two different ways at two different times to represent God and people in this beautiful love story. So this was all in place before sin ever entered into the picture. There's really no need for anything negative to be part of this. Last night I mentioned in Genesis 2 when it says Adam needed someone, and the text says suitable, I mentioned it can also be translated a completer. Again, important to understand, we're not saying when you get married, you're both half a person and you complete each other. That's not true. What it is saying is Adam needed someone else to complete the picture of this love story. Every woman in the room, you are ultimately going to be a completer or you're going to be a competer. There isn't much room in between that. If you don't trust your husband to do his job, then you're going to do it for yourself. And you're going to become a competitor. And your marriage is going to be defined by constant competition. It's not at all uncommon. It usually sounds something like, well, I do this, and I do this, and I do this, and the least you could do. And you can hear it. It's a competition. At the end of the day, my job as a husband is to die to myself and fulfill my role and to love Patty. Her job is to respond to that and to help me with that to create this picture. So here's the deal. Speaking on behalf of all the men in the room, this is a very difficult assignment because you ladies are very confusing. You're very confusing. When Patty and I first got married, I had a lot to learn. I've raised 3 daughters. I had a lot more to learn. There are just things I didn't know. For example, I didn't know you could cry for no reason. When I got married, there were times when she was crying, and I would say, honey, why are you crying? And she would say, I don't know. I'm like, what? It's like, I didn't know such a thing happened. You got to have a reason. I probably said that. Well, you got to have a reason. Let's fix this. Let's figure it out. But apparently that's a thing. Just cry for no reason. One time, she was crying, and I said, honey, what's the matter? And she said, I'm so happy. I'm like, what? You know, we men, that's really confusing to us. We have a Popeyes restaurant just a few blocks from the church, and one Wednesday night, this was years ago, my oldest daughter was in her senior year of high school, and we all gathered at the Popeyes and kind of touch base, and then we all go our ways for the Wednesday programs. So we're sitting in Popeyes, and it's a very small, it's probably a third of this room right here. So it's really small, and we're sitting in there. And I said to my oldest daughter, and I said just like this, honey, have you thought about what you want to do next year? Out came the tear. It was a total meltdown. Everybody in Popeyes is looking at us. I'm looking at Patty like, what is happening here? So she got her calmed down, and we had to all go our separate ways. When I got home that evening, I said to Patty, honey, what happened? Like, was it me? Like, what did I say? And she's like, oh, it's not you. She's just emotional right now. I'm like, sorry, but that doesn't help me at all. It's like, I don't even know what that means. They're just things I needed to learn. You ladies you're confusing. And I suppose that's part of the adventure of it all, the beauty of it all. But it's also true that about the time we start to figure you out, you change. So what Patty needed before we had kids really changed once we had little kids, really changed again when we had teenagers, has really changed again as empty nesters. And I'm guessing about to change as I retire and am home more, and we'll have to figure that out. So it's a bit of a moving target. So here's the deal. There is no possibility for me to create an environment for her to flourish if she won't help me. I stand no chance of getting it right. I want to with all my heart, but I need her to enter in. I need her to help me. In this season of life, what do you need to flourish? So guys, I'm going to give you a question that is very helpful. Like I would write it down. Because between a wife and 3 girls, this has saved me more times than I can imagine. Here's the question. Honey, what do you need from me right now? I started actually asking it with my girls because they're so confusing to me sometimes. And I would start to ask them, what do you need from me right now? Because do you need me to just listen? Do you need me to try and help you figure it out? Do you need some sort of counsel? You need me to do something? And what I learned is if I was to guess, almost every time, I would have guessed wrong. It's not like you just figured out. I still do it. My girls are all adults. I still do it. Honey, what do you need from me right now? And sometimes they'll say, Dad, I just need you to listen. But other times, like, Dad, I need you to help me think this through and figure it out. I want to do my job. I do with all my heart. But I do need help. And if Patty won't cooperate with me, I stand no chance of getting it right. I think that's the submission. These are our roles. Can't we work together as a team? Can't you help me to create an environment where you can flourish as the person God's made you to be? All right. So jumping back to 1 Peter again. First Peter chapter 3, verse 1. Now, it's helpful to understand that this is a part in Peter where he's talking about submission in a whole variety of roles. Submission at work, submission to the government. So it's just kind of rolling through these, which gets us chapter 3, verse 1. In the same way, so that's saying just like with all these other roles, in the same way, you wives be submissive to your own husbands, so that even if any of them are disobedient to the word, they may be won without a word, but by the behavior of their wives as they observe your chaste and respectful behavior. There's lots more to follow. We don't have time to get into that. But Peter is saying, ladies, even if your husband isn't doing his job, how do you respond to that? If it's going to be an act of rebellion, a fight, it's like that's what you're going to get. And it's just going to further break down the relationship. So notice very specifically, Peter says, don't do that with words. In other words, nagging, arguing, accusing. Speaking as a man, I'm just going to tell you right now, ladies, that will not change us. Peter's right about that. You cannot nag me into doing better. So he's saying, that's venting. It's a lot like parents when they give lectures to their teenagers. It's like, stop doing that. That's not good parenting, it's just venting. No teenagers ever come out of a lecture saying, oh, what was I thinking? I've completely changed my mind. So it's kind of a similar deal. It's like, just as confusing as women are to men, I'm sure we as men are to you ladies. I just can't address that because I haven't been a lady. Contrary to conventional thinking these days, I've never been a lady. I've always been a man, so I can't really figure that out. But the counsel from Peter is, even if they're not really doing their job, like, how do you change that? Well, it's by behavior. And there's two things he mentions, is they observe your chaste and respectful behavior. So think of it this way. It's very important that you don't create an environment where you're making God a competitor instead of an ally. So let's imagine a couple, and she all of a sudden gets energized spiritually, she comes to Christ, or just really starts growing, and things really start changing with her. It's not an uncommon scene at all. And with all sincerity, she wants her husband with her on this journey. And she wants him to experience what she's experienced. She's being very sincere. But if she's not careful, what her husband is hearing is it seemed like everything was okay in our marriage. And then you got all excited about Jesus, and now you're very dissatisfied with me as a husband. So now I feel like as a husband, I'm competing with God for your affection. That doesn't make me like Jesus very much. You've made him a competitor. That's the problem. That's what a bunch of nagging and way too many words is going to turn into. Contrary to that, if Jesus makes you a better wife, your chaste and respectful behavior, that's something your husband's going to be responsive to. And he might think, I kind of like this Jesus thing because I think it's made you a better wife, and that's meaningful to me, and at least there's a better chance for this to go down a better path. So the two words, chaste and respectful. Chaste is a word that means without contamination. Basically what it means is no manipulation. Just means honest, authentic behavior. So at great risk, I probably should leave it there and move on, but that's not really why we're here. Manipulation, the problem with manipulation is the same as intimidation. Generally speaking, it works. That's the problem. It works for a while, but it slowly breaks down the marriage. So I'm confident that none of you ladies who got out on a brutally cold morning would ever be guilty of manipulation. But there's probably friends of yours that didn't come today because it's so cold. So I'm going to tell you so you can help them. But manipulation comes in different forms that we don't necessarily think of. So for example, anger. Anger is just a form of manipulation. It's just a way to control the environment. It's manipulative. Something like nagging is just a form of manipulation. It's a way to control the environment. Something like always playing the victim. It's just a way to control. It's manipulation. It's a way to control. Control is a way to control it. I have to control everything, which is just a form of manipulation. Even what happens in the bedroom. I mean, it must absolutely grieve the heart of God when wives use that as a weapon instead of the beautiful expression of love that God intended it to be. All those just begin to break down the relationship, and I guarantee you don't motivate your husband in the right direction. So that's the idea of chaste. Respectful is the idea of value or honor. Just like husbands to their wives, then wives to your husbands, even though you may not really understand him completely. Can you respect the fact that God made him as a man? And he's different from you. He's not your child. He's your lover. He's your husband. I'm shocked by oftentimes hearing wives talk to their husbands. It's like, I just want to say, he's not a child. Stop talking to him like that. Because I can guarantee you from the viewpoint of a man, that's never going to change me. I believe every man has what I refer to as a hero complex. It's the knight in shining armor thing. It shows up in different ways with guys. It's been called wild at heart. It's all these different things over the years. But at the end of the day, who we are. That's who we are as men. And when women start to dent our armor, you're hit at the heart of where we live. And I'll guarantee you, we will fight back. We fight back one of two ways. Either we get more aggressive and we power up, or we just go passive. We just check out. More interest at work, more interest in hobbies. We just check out because we're not going to put up. So even though that may not make any sense to you, if I ever said that to Patty, and you just need to grow up, I can't even tell you what that would do to me. There have been times in our marriage I said to Patty, honey, I don't feel like I'm your knight in shining armor anymore. Kids, busyness, life. I can either sit back and resent it, or we can talk about it. Because she doesn't want that either. She wants this marriage to flourish, but sometimes you have to talk about hard things. But if in that moment, which from my point of view is incredibly vulnerable, she would say, just grow up. I couldn't even put into words what that would do to me at that moment. Because for me, that's an incredible moment of vulnerability. Thankfully, she's never said that. She's like, I don't want that. What do we need to do? And we talk through like what's happening and what do we need to work on. All right. As they observe your chaste and respectful behavior. So ultimately, this is a picture. Roll the husband, roll the wife, of the ultimate love story between Christ and his church. That's our assignment and the practical realities of that. Let me give you just a couple quick practical things besides that, and then we'll take a quick break. Are we good with that? Yeah, okay. I mean, really, what are you going to say in that moment? No, be quiet. Here he comes. All right. So one of the things that we all have to deal with is conflict. I think of conflict as like a staircase into intimacy. And what I mean by that is the fact that we come together, a husband and wife, in this really personal, intimate relationship, we're going to bump into things that you don't bump into with anybody else. That's just the way it is. That's a part of the journey into intimacy. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with your marriage. It means you're working your way through that to deeper intimacy. So the reality is that you're willing to expend more energy for relationships that mean more to you. So in other words, if afterward you went to the Dollar General, and when you're checking out, the person's really rude to you, chances are there's nobody in the room that's going to expend a significant amount of energy trying to fix that relationship. It's like, whatever, and you move on. But what defines a friendship is these are people that I'm willing to expend some energy to work through things because I care about them because we're friends. The ultimate expression of that is with a husband and a wife. Patty and I deal with things at a level nobody else ever gets to or sees. So we're going to bump into things, and so you have to resolve that. So what happens is every time we bump into something and we resolve it, in a sense, we drop one step deeper into intimacy. But if you have a point, if there are things in your marriage you can't resolve, it becomes a platform, a landing, and that's as deep as you're ever going to get. There is a difference between having a conflict and kissing and making up and resolving the conflict. Marriages are bound to have points of conflict. And however that looks for you in your marriage, but at some point, maybe you pull back, a little time passes, I'm sorry too, you kiss and make up. But oftentimes what doesn't dawn on you is we didn't resolve the conflict. We just moved on. So you're guaranteed to come back to it again. So if I could plant like a red flag in your marriage as it relates to this, it would be there is no reason you should keep having conflict over the same issues. That to happen. So if that is happening, it's because you're not resolving the conflict. The benefit is when you get it resolved, you drop one step deeper into a more intimate relationship, and that just goes on and on and on. And I think part of that's how God exposes stuff in us that we need to deal with to become more like Christ. It's a good and necessary process. So there's a proverb . Okay, all of a sudden I went brain dead. That's not helpful. All right, for the sake of time, let me tell you, and then I'll look during the break because my brain decided to stop working here. So the proverb basically talks about 3 parts. By wisdom a house is built, by understanding it's established, and by knowledge, basically, it's put together. I find those to be 3 very helpful steps. So think of it like this. The first one is wisdom. In the poetic literature, like the Proverbs, wisdom is the ability to see with discernment. It's the ability to put your finger on something. It's to really see it. So by wisdom, the house is built. The problem often couples have, is what you're dealing with are symptoms. And as long as you keep dealing with symptoms, you're not solving the problem. So think of it like this. We live out in the country. Several times we've had weddings on our property. Let's say Patty says to me a week before the wedding, there's a lot of weeds in the yard. Would you mind taking care of them? So I get out the mower and I mow them off. And the yard looks beautiful at the moment. But it doesn't take too many days before the weeds are all back. Because all I was doing is mowing off the symptoms. What I need to do is to actually get rid of the weed, or it's just going to keep growing back. Oftentimes, what's happening with couples is you're just dealing with the symptoms. You're just mowing it off. So what's helpful is if you have an area in your life where you continue to have conflict, you're probably just dealing with symptoms. You just have to back up a little bit and think, okay, we're not getting to the core issue. Like a lot of couples have issues around money. It's like, well, what's the deeper issue going on here? Because there's something deeper going on and we're not figuring it out. That's why we can't seem to resolve this conflict. So wisdom is the ability to put your finger on, okay, I think that's our problem. And that's the hardest step. Understanding carries the of fixing it, straightening it out, untwisting it. That's what the Hebrew word means. So basically, okay, there's the problem. Understanding is, okay, now what do we do to resolve that problem? How do we fix this? Knowledge then carries the idea of, okay, what did we learn from this? Now we should be smarter than we were. What did we learn? Let's put that in place so we don't make the same mistake again. When I was in Broken Bow, I remember a fellowship dinner. There was a farmer there in our area that was very successful, and there was somebody that had moved into the county who had been mostly a rancher who was trying to do some farming. And I know nothing about either, really. But I'm sitting at the table, and I'm listening as Gordon is talking to Roger, trying to figure out why it's not working. And it was a fascinating conversation. I learned all kinds of things I didn't know before. But trying to learn, okay, what issue, okay, that's not really, okay, those symptoms, here's what the issue is, Roger tells him. Okay, here's what you need to do to correct that. And next year, here's what you do to make sure that doesn't happen again. So it's a process that we use in life all the time. Simple but clear. The thing to notice is if you keep having conflict around the same issue, that's a problem. It shouldn't be that way. So you're probably dealing with symptoms. Get a little deeper, figure it out. What's really the problem? How do we sort this out? And how do we not keep making the same mistake? And you've dropped one step deeper into intimacy and continue to grow. So resolving conflict. The last one is understanding differences. Talked about in Genesis, the male and female made different time, different way. We are different. Contrary to a lot of what's going on in our culture, we are different. And there's a ton of research that would support that conclusion. So typically you marry someone that's pretty different from you. That's the beauty of it. We typically don't marry someone like ourselves. Those differences can either be a great source of enrichment or a great source of frustration. Often the very things that attracted you to someone are now the things that annoy you about that same person. It's an issue of perspective. It's a choice I make. Patty and I are very different. This summer we'll have been married 45 years, and I would say, like, when we got married, we were like this. Now we're kind of like this. We'll never be like this, nor should we be. That would not be good. But there's so many things where I've changed. I think it's made me a better pastor. I think it's made me a better preacher. I think it's made me more like Jesus. But you have to think about your perspective. Am I going to choose to just be frustrated and annoyed, or can I see value in the ways we're different? If we were going to drive from Ainsworth to Chicago, to me, let's get there. That's the point. Patty has the strange thought that we should stop a couple times along the way. It's like, why would you stop? We're not there yet. That's my personality. Patty loves to plant flowers, and flowers bloom and they're pretty. But at the end of the season, they die and go away. And I'm like, well, that was dumb. I like to plant trees. I want to still see it in 30 years. It's just the difference in our personality. But I've changed a lot. One of the ways I've really changed is I've learned to stop and smell the flowers. I've learned to grow. I'm learning to see life along the way. I think it's just made me a much better person. It's changed me in a lot of ways. But you have to choose your perspective as to whether it's just going to be frustrating or whether you can see the value in the differences. When I was in high school, I was in the jock group, and I was taking a shop class. And the only reason I was taking shop class is because the football coach was the shop teacher. So I didn't really know anything. Over here is a table of gearheads. They're in there because they love the motors and could care less about sports. So we didn't really know each other. We didn't talk to each other. We didn't have much use for each other. But at the end of the class, the final assignment is you had to put this small engine back together, and it had to run, or you don't pass the class. So we're trying to put this motor back together, and we're just a bunch of dumb jocks, and we don't know what we're doing, and we get it back together, and there's still pieces on the table. The football coach comes along, and he's like, "Clark, just make it run." And he's getting madder and madder. Finally, he says, "Do whatever you have to do. The motor's got to run." So I had the job of humbling myself, slinking over to the gearhead table, saying, "Hey, we're just a bunch of dumb jocks. We don't know what we're doing. If the motor doesn't run, we don't pass. Can somebody please help us?" So there's this kid, this is the 70s, long hair, smells of cigarettes, AC/DC t-shirt, bell-bottom jean. He doesn't say a word. Just gets up, kind of slinks over to our table, doesn't really look at us. Vroom. We're all like, "Holy cow, what did you just do?" But what was so interesting is everything changed between us. From that day forward, it's like we were pals. We talked to each other, we interacted with each other, we became friends with each other. All of a sudden, it was like nothing really changed other than our perspective. It's like, man, you are really smart. I don't know that they ever found a real purpose for being a jock. But whatever, it's like nothing changed except our perspective. And our perspective changed, which changed a lot. And I think that's true through the duration of our marriage. We're different by design. God wanted us different. And you can either choose to be frustrated by that, or you can choose to enter into it, to learn, to grow, and in the process, become more like Christ. So after the break, and we get back together, last thing we're going to talk about is intimacy in marriage. Charles.
Isn't that amazing? I mean, I'm feeling very convicted. And probably you are as well, because he's covered so many different areas that are important for our marriages to succeed and work through issues. And just that last deal about if you're having continual problems in the same area, you got to kind of dig a little deeper. I'm sure we're going to have a talk on that. So thank you a bunch. But we're going to take a break, 15, 20 minutes. And I do want to do the drawing right now for those 3 pictures that are part of the place where you can stand in front to take a picture. So, and you actually have to be here. So when you hear the music, after the 15 minutes that we're out there, that's a signal to come on in, and we're going to crank things back up. So let me go ahead and do this drawing. I'm not looking. Okay, and I will say this, I'm not very good with names, but this one I think is pretty straightforward. Paul and Janelle Carpenter. So, where are you guys at? All right, well, here's this. And, oh yeah, don't take, leave it now, but don't go home without them, okay? Because, yeah. All right, so you guys are dismissed. Go ahead. We got 15, 20 minutes. Grab a bite to eat. We're going to have like a brunch back there. So go ahead. And if you want to get your picture done, Goose and Annie are right here.
Why don't you join with me here? I was a wretch. I remember who I was. I was lost. I was blind. I was running out of time. Sin separated. The breach was far too wide. But from the far side of the chasm, you held me in your side. So you made a way across the great divide, left behind heaven's throne to build it here inside. There at the cross, you paid the debt I owe, broke my chains, freed my soul. For the first time I had hope. Thank you, Jesus, for the blood applied. Thank you, Jesus, it has washed me white. Thank you, Jesus, you have saved my life, brought me from the darkness into glorious light. You took my place, laid inside my tomb of sin. You were buried for 3 days, but then you walked right out again. And now death has no sting, and life has no end. I have been transformed by the blood of the Lamb. Thank you, Jesus, for the blood applied. Thank you, Jesus, it has washed me white. Thank you, Jesus, you have saved my life and brought me from the darkness into glorious light. There is nothing stronger than the wonder-working power of the blood. The blood that calls us sons and daughters. We are ransomed by a Father through the blood. The blood. There is nothing stronger wonder-working power of the blood that calls us sons and daughters. We are ransomed by our Father through the blood, the blood. Thank you, Jesus, for the blood applied. Thank you, Jesus, it has washed me white. Thank you, Jesus, you have saved my life, brought me from the darkness into glorious light. Glory to His name. Glory to His name. There to my heart was the blood applied. Glory to His name. Great singing. Have a seat.
All right, here we go. Last session. Just before I move on, I found it. It is in the Proverbs. I was in chapter 23, and I should have been in chapter 24. 24, verses 3 and 4. By wisdom a house is built, by understanding it is established, by knowledge the rooms are filled with all precious and pleasant riches. All right. So here's my question. Do you think the culture values sex? I think the culture would say they do. But there is a difference between valuing something and being obsessed with something. What you value, you protect. Our culture shows all the signs of an inability to be satisfied, which drives the desperation of all kinds of bad behavior. When I was a student at the Moody Bible, I had a buddy on my floor whose parents were missionaries in the Philippines. His dad was an art guy, and sent him a picture. It was a fairly large painting done with knives from the Philippines. He bought it off this street artist. And I happened to comment. I thought it was really neat. So he said, let me see if my dad will send you one. So like for $20, he sends this beautiful, you can tell it's an original. It's done with knives. The blobs of paint are all there. Came with a cheap frame. And so I used to put it on the wall of my dorm room. And that's right where my bed was. And then on the other side of that wall was the hallway in the dorm. Well, you know how it goes in a guy's dorm. They figured out that if they slam against that wall, then the painting flies off the nails and lands on me. So it was great entertainment for them at 2 o'clock in the morning, whatever. They'd hit the wall, the big old painting comes off, the frame comes off. I fling it off myself, and I find it in the morning and pick it up. So that's kind of how I valued the painting. Patty and I got married. I left to go to seminary. It was out in my mom's garage. We eventually took it with us to Broken Bow. It was stacked up somewhere in the basement. It was a $20 painting. I went to visit, Patty and I went to visit this friend of mine, and he had his painting on his wall, same painting. And I said, hey, you still got your painting? It's really nice. He's like, yeah, it's the craziest thing. The guy went from being a street artist to having this studio in Manila in the Philippines, and his paintings are worth thousands of dollars. So all of a sudden, I go down and I dig through and I find my painting, and I paid way more for the frame than I paid for this painting. And I put it on the wall, you know what I'm saying, to Patty, you know, don't touch this, it's worth a lot of money, and girls don't touch it, don't throw the ball around the painting. Well, we still have the painting, it still hangs in our house. It has great value. But what's interesting about that is nothing about the painting changed. It's the exact same painting, everything about it the same. The only difference was my perspective. And when I realized it had value, it changed how I treated it. What we perceive is having value, we protect. I started noticing, I read a lot of secular books. I started noticing years ago secular books with titles like this: Cheap Sex, The End of Sex. When even the secular world is sounding the alarm that we're so far out of bounds, we're doing great damage to people's lives, it makes you sit up and notice. I don't think it's difficult to see that we live in a culture that does not have the ability to be satisfied, which is creating this desperate stranger and stranger behavior. Again, going back to the research, some of it by Wilcox, some of it showed up in Nancy Pearcey's book. There's a ton of research. But the number one environment where people experienced sexual satisfaction, evangelical, conservative, Bible-believing, church-attending Christian marriages, which again goes back contrary to the way Hollywood wants us to think. It's all this wildness out there. It comes back to following God's roadmap to flourishing. That is where people are going to find what their soul is searching for. The enemy is such a liar. It's God is not good. He's restrictive. He's not generous. Doesn't want anybody to have any fun. If you're going to follow him, it's a life of no's. So it's best for you to be your own God. Run your life your own way. Even among Christian young people, this is a commonly held view. If I'm going to commit to Jesus, it's a life of less instead of a life of more. C.S. Lewis talked about the problem is not that God wants us to experience less. What he wants is for us to not settle for less, to experience more. And then his famous line, we're so willing to settle for mud pies in the street when what God wants for us is a holiday at sea. There's just so much truth to that in this topic of sexual intimacy. So back to Genesis 1, I just want to review a few things. So with all the lies, all the confusion, all the struggles in the culture, what's concerning is sometimes the one voice that's not heard is God's. Growing up in the fundamentalist movement, the prevailing idea was that good people didn't about this subject. And that communicates all kinds of things that are unfortunate. The fact is, if Genesis 1:1 is true, then you have to wrestle with the fact that God is the author of pleasure. God created sex. God made us as sexual beings with a sexual drive. So we have to understand, like, why? What does that mean? A lot of the young people today are really about causes. And I'm not criticizing that. They're about all kinds of social injustices and causes all over the world. But I am confident I could easily make the case for you that there is no greater social injustice in the world today than sexual immorality. If you pile up everything that affects, from poverty to disease to abuse to trafficking, all these things, it's like if we just listened to God in this one area, the world would change overnight. But we just refuse to listen. But you'll listen because that's why you're here, and hopefully this is helpful to you. So let's go back and review just a couple of things. So we learned in verse 26 of chapter 1 that we are made in the image of God. Image is everything when talking about our sexuality, because it's what distinguishes us from the rest of creation. Humans have the capacity for a depth in relationship that simply doesn't exist in any other creature that God has made. Humans are the only ones that relate to one another sexually, face to face. And it's a reflection of the fact that this is different. Animals procreate. But God's made humans to enter into deep, meaningful relationship that is a taste of the depth of the relationship He wants to experience with us. And within that context is sexual intimacy. What the culture is promoting is the trashing of the image and a choosing to act more like the barnyard animals than people made in the image of God. What we've been called to is beautiful, but it's distinct and it's different, it's unique, and at the core of that is the image. We talked about a volitional will. It's like a choice. A choice. I choose. I can't force Patty to marry me. It was her choice. I can't make her love me. That's her choice. As humans, we have a volitional will, and we choose to enter into this love relationship. But we also talked about the idea of moral accountability. Then we're responsible for the choices we make. We looked at verse 28. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. So that's the first command God gives, is an expression of our sexuality. We also looked at verse 27 in the three phrases. God created in His image. In His image He created him. Male and female He created them. It's just so interesting that that third phrase introduces sexuality. What it's saying is, yes, we're created by God and uniquely made in His image, and somehow that gets expressed in our sexuality as man and woman. First chapter of the Bible. So we moved on and we talked about the creation of the woman and all of that, and then we ended at verse 23. So I want to pick up that conversation in the last two verses, which are the ones quoted in Ephesians 5. For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother. Now when you read that, it's very easy to read over the words, for this reason. But you got to stop and ask yourself the question, for what reason? For what reason is because of what we talked about last night. Because the relationship between a man and a woman is meant to be this beautiful picture of the ultimate love story between God and his people, because that's God's intent, because that's God's purpose for this reason. So that's the be fruitful and then the multiply. A man shall leave his father and mother, shall be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. The man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed. So you have a family that becomes a family of families, and be fruitful and multiply, and hopefully a right view of God being passed on from generation to generation. The phrase be joined to his wife. The Hebrew words basically mean something like to be glued together. There's no that's referencing the sexual union, because the New Testament uses it that way in a couple passages affirming that. So we know that for sure. So the idea in chapter 2 is this idea of being joined together, this beautiful expression of this love story, in order to generate children who grow up and then go out and families become multiple families. This is not a recreational sport. It's not a hit and run activity. The language literally means to be glued together. You take two pieces of plywood, you glue them together, they never will come apart again without tear and damage. So God has wired us. He's made us for intimacy. Think about created in his image, male and female. All you have to do is look at the parts. They all fit. It's clear there's a designer here. His intent is obvious. As a culture, we like to keep saying follow the science, but we don't follow the science. We're completely unwilling to do that. If you're willing to follow the science is very clear. This isn't confusing. Paul makes the same argument in Romans chapter 1, is when we decide to be our own God, then it's going to show up in our sexuality. It's just going to go from bad to worse. That's the whole argument halfway through Romans chapter 1. So this idea of being joined together, glued together, and they shall become one flesh. So God's intent is that two people come together to experience something beautiful according to his design in order to picture the ultimate love story, which then produces children, and children grow up and create families and families of families, and this right view of God is passed on from generation to generation. All right, so let's talk science, and then let's talk theology. There's been a whole bunch of study done in more recent years on the brain, and one of the things that we're learning is that we were actually created for intimacy. That's how the brain works. So, for example, when a mom breastfeeds a child, a hormone called oxytocin is released. They call it the attachment hormone. And it connects the baby with the mother, reflecting God's design. But now we've also discovered that when two people have sex, the same hormone is released in order to fulfill what we just saw at the end of chapter 2. The two become one flesh, with the biological release of this attachment hormone. Lauren Winner from Duke University famously said, when two people have sex together, their body makes a promise whether they do or not. That's a great quote because what it's saying is your brain is wired to fulfill Genesis chapter 2. It's not wired to make sex into a recreational sport. It becomes a gluing and a tearing and a gluing and a tearing, which just continues to do more and more damage to where more and more it's less of a relational experience and more of just a physical experience, which has less meaning, which makes people more desperate, which drives more and more desperate behavior. That's the path we're on as a culture. One of the interesting things about the brain and the way God's made us is that when you have sex with someone, so Patty and I were both virgins when we got married. She's the only person I've ever known sexually. So we had sex after we got married. My brain actually creates a pathway to Patty. And every time we come together, my brain recognizes, oh, that's Patty. And it gets stronger and stronger and stronger. But when I have sex with someone else, my brain expects Patty. But it's not Patty. And so it confuses my brain. And now it's trying to create an alternate pathway. And every time that happens, that pathway not only becomes more confused, it becomes less efficient, less pleasure. So again, it creates this more and more desperate search for something that will satisfy. It's evidence that God has actually hardwired our brains to live out exactly what is described at the end of Genesis chapter 2. Another way to think about it is think about like a garden hose. When you hook up the garden hose, if there's no leaks anywhere, that is the strongest flow of the water out the end of the hose. But every place there's a leak, now imagine somebody going along and poking nails in that. Every time you do that, some of the water leaks out. So there's less flow at the end. Basically, that's the idea. The more holes, the more leak, then the less pressure. In other words, the less pleasure. It becomes less efficient. It's contrary to the way God has made us to function. Now, thankfully, over time, a lot of that can be repaired. But it is really interesting the way God has wired us to experience pleasure. This idea that somehow God's embarrassed by sex, the good people shouldn't talk about it, that it's, God made it, but he's really not for it. I mean, there's all this confusion around this topic. But if you're going to accept the first 5 words of the Bible, then there is a creator. This is how he's made us. He's made us this way for a reason. And more, even the neurological stuff says this is actually exactly the way we're made. So we do have to wrestle with that. So from the scientific piece of it to the theological piece of it. So why? Why did God make us this way? I'm going to contend to you that the sexual drive that is within us as people made in the image of God is ultimately our longing to be intimate with God. That's why he made us this way. When you get married and experience that relationship with a one flesh partner, lifelong one flesh partner, that's the intent. It's a beautiful thing, but the reality is Patty can never satisfy me. It's really important to understand she's not God. All she can give me is a taste of what ultimately satisfies. So what I experience with her is a taste. I want more. More has to be found in God. So the more meaningful that is to me in my marriage, the more I desire satisfaction in the relationship with God. As a result of a deeper relationship with God, I have more love to share with her, and it becomes more meaningful, which causes me to want more, but more is found in God. And that should be the cycle that defines the duration of your marriage. It just wants me to fall more deeply in love with Jesus. It's a taste, but ultimately only God can satisfy. In 1945, there was an interesting book written by a guy named Bruce Marshall called The World of Flesh and Reverend Smith. And in there's a classic line. Smith says, when a man is found knocking on the door of a brothel, he is actually there searching for God. That is 100% correct. So you think in a secular culture, moving farther and farther away from God, our lives become more and more empty, which is why they become more and more busy. And ultimately, then, our search for something to satisfy becomes more and more desperate. Have you ever asked yourself, like, where is all this going? Now they're starting to experiment with AI and robotic marriage partners and robotic sex partners. And part of what's happening is we've become so selfish, self-centered, and narcissistic because that's what a secular culture does to us. We're going to get to the point where no one can stand us except a machine that's programmed to worship us like we want to be worshiped. It's like, if you want to know where it's going, I think that's where it's going. So far adrift from God's intent. So there's a couple theological I think are helpful. One is this phrase, the two shall become one flesh. So we talked last night about the Trinity. 3 persons, one God. It's very mysterious, but it's very important. Over the years, people have tried to illustrate it with an egg or with water, ice, and there's been all kinds of ways to try it, but they all break down pretty fast. The best illustration we have is from God. How do 2 people become one? If you add to the fact that that is a picture that ultimately leads to deeper intimacy with God, you already have this Trinity. So if you were to ask me the question, are you and Patty one flesh? My answer would be yes, absolutely. You say, well, what does that mean? It's like kind of hard to explain. It has its own mystery. It's kind of like when somebody asks you, how did you know this is the person you're supposed to marry? It's like, oh, I had a checklist, 10 things. Patty had 9 of 10. It's like, that's a hard question to answer. Most of us just say something like, well, we just knew. How do I know that I'm one flesh with Patty? All I can tell you is I know that's true. I'm in a one flesh relationship with her that is different from every other relationship I have. And perhaps it's just a taste, a little bit of an illustration of how 3 can be one, especially when you understand God into that mix. So I think that's part of it. But I think there's a deeper part of it. When you go on in Genesis and get to chapter 4, literally the Hebrew reads, Adam knew Eve. Man knew the woman. That's the way the King James writes it. And in my younger days, I just thought it was because the King James didn't want to say the word. But actually, that's not it at all. As a matter of fact, that's a very accurate translation, and I wish that was still in our more modern translations. It's the Hebrew word yada. And basically, it means to know. Adam knew Eve. What's significant about that is the same word that's consistently used for how we know God. You know, the same thing in the Greek language in the New Testament. The same word to know God is used for a husband knowing his wife. Carries the idea that this is a taste of what ultimately can be satisfied in relationship with God. So it helps us understand theologically, like, why did God make us this way? Because God is the author of pleasure. He wanted us to delight in a garden paradise together, but in a way that just stirs up a deeper desire to experience intimacy with Him. So the word is consistently used. To know your spouse is a taste of what it means to know God. So there's deep theology in this whole topic of sexual intimacy. In Psalm 16:11, it says, God, in your presence, what? Are rules forevermore. That's not what it says. Your presence is what? Pleasure forevermore. Do you understand that God made you as a pleasure-seeking being? Ultimately to find your satisfaction in a beautiful love relationship with Him. My soul is always going to be searching and at unrest until I ultimately find what it's longing for in this relationship with God. Long time ago, probably in the 80s, having grown up in the fundamentalist movement, I had some confusions about trying to understand, like, what I understood the gospel, I'm in, got my ticket to heaven, now where do we go from here? Until I read John Piper's book, Desiring God, subtitle, Confessions of a Christian Hedonist. As a fundamentalist, I'm like, I have never read anything like that before. But it was eye-opening to me that ultimately God has made us to experience deep pleasure in this relationship with Him. He's made us as pleasure-seeking beings. With a one-flesh, lifelong partner, you get a taste of it, which hopefully stirs up a longing to experience something more, something deeper, which can only be experienced in God. I think that's kind of the core of the theology of our sexuality. To move from there to just some practical things to think about. This is such a doozy talk, I need 2 Bibles. No, I'm just kidding. This is a confusing topic for multiple reasons. So for me growing up, nobody talked about sex. It wasn't talked about at home, wasn't talked about at church. Nobody ever said to me the things I just told you. It's like, never heard of such a thing. The only message we heard is, don't you dare have sex with anybody else till you're married. It's like it is the ultimate sin. So then, you get married. And all of a sudden, just because you stood at the altar and said, I do, now it's okay. Now stop and think about that. Can you think of any other area of our lives like that? Where at one point, it's like this thing you better not do or else, and literally in a moment in time, it's okay. It's like, what? So I think a lot of us that grew up that way, it's like, I don't know what to do with this. Am I supposed to enjoy it? Am I supposed to not enjoy it, but not too much? There's all this confusion of trying to sort out, like, where does God fit into this? And I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do this. I've never known any other area where it was bad and now it's not bad. And that's really confusing. The other side of that is a lot of people grow up in a much more promiscuous environment. Weren't taught, didn't care, just a different environment. So sex is more like a recreational sport and multiple partners, and then you get married and there's kind of I've been there, done that. It's a very different moment. So then the struggle is, I'm not really sure what the point is. Been there, done that. So it doesn't take long before it's like, it's just more of the same. Because it doesn't have the understanding of intimacy and this desire to experience something deeper with God. So because of how you were doing it, it mostly was reduced to a physical act. So now you get into marriage and it kind of stays that way. And so there's no real depth or meaning and purpose. So after a while, it's like, whatever. Because there isn't the depth of the relationship and the desire that should have been there because it was abused before you got married. So there's kind of these two sides that people come from and enter into marriage, and then this becomes a really confused topic. The great thing about the brain, like I have a master's degree in education, and when I got that, the belief, the conventional wisdom is your brain's pretty much formed by the end of adolescence, and then that's what it is. Now we know that's absolutely not true, that the brain keeps changing and developing all the way until the day you die. It's called plasticity. So the wonderful reality is all that can be changed. You just have to begin to establish neural pathways that become stronger and stronger and stronger, to have a right perspective, to understand what is the role of this in my life. You can heal the brain. You can begin to change that. But part of what you have to understand is what's going to change it is not more of the same. What's going to change it is entering into what God intended in the first place. Relationship, intimacy, love. Sometimes people refer to what happens in the bedroom as making love. I don't like that phrase. You cannot make love that way. Love is made out of the bedroom. It's just expressed in the bedroom. You can't just go off on a weekend and light some candles and have your music and somehow replace everything that's missing for that to be a deeply satisfying relationship. It doesn't work that way. So part of what has to be understood is we have to regain what it means to love one another and to care about one another and reestablish relationship in this experience the way God intended it to be. And little by little, you can reestablish those pathways, and it becomes deeper and it becomes more meaningful, and you recapture the way it's supposed to be. But it does take effort. You have to understand you're retraining your brain to do this God's way, to experience what you do want to experience. If you don't do that, it's just bad things are going to happen. With internet and everything else, this whole pornography has become a disaster with men and women. And it's a substitute for all this confusion and pain, and it's a complicated subject. But ultimately, it goes in bad places if you don't understand what really is supposed to be happening at home and be committed to somehow figuring that out. If you've experienced some sort of abuse or trauma in your past, you probably need the help of a counselor. This is complicated. That never should have happened. That's part of the social injustice when people choose to do this outside of God's plan and purpose. You may need some help sorting that out in order to get back on track and experience what you want to experience with your partner. The last thing I want to cover is in Proverbs chapter 5. Proverbs has a lot to say about this topic. We obviously don't have time to look at a lot of that. I really like Proverbs chapter 5. Just going to look at parts of it. So it opens, "My son, give attention to my wisdom." So listen to me. "Incline your ear to my understanding, that you may observe discretion, that your lips may reserve knowledge. For the lips of an adulteress drip honey, and smoother than oil is her speech. But in the end she is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death, her steps take hold of Sheol. She does not ponder the path of life. Her ways are unstable. She does not know it." That is a bad path that a lot of people are on. In verse 3, it says, "For the lips of an adulteress." A lot of your Bibles, in the margin, I don't like that translation. The Hebrew is literally strange woman. And a lot of your Bibles will cite that in the margins. The idea is this. It's like throughout the book of Proverbs, when it talks about the adulteress, it's actually the Hebrew strange woman. Like, who is this strange woman? You're thinking, I think I might know who that is. What it's actually referring to is any sexual behavior outside of God's intent. It's strange to God's intent. That's the word. It's really helpful to understand that, because if you put that in there all through Proverbs, it's like a lot of these passages suddenly make a lot more sense. So it covers any sexual behavior outside of God's plan and purpose. It's strange to him. Pick it up in verse 15. "Drink water from your own cistern, and fresh water from your own well. Should your springs be dispersed abroad, streams of water in the streets, let them be yours alone, and not for strangers with you. Let your fountain be blessed, and rejoice in the wife of your youth. As a loving hind and a graceful doe, let her breast satisfy you at all times. Be exhilarated." The literal there would be intoxicated, always with her love. So really interesting imagery there. Here's the imagery. In the ancient world, people had cisterns in their house, and they kept them in the house to keep them clean. So that's what they drink from. Out in the city square was a public cistern. It's where the animals drank. But the rats and the mice and the critters got in there. It was stinky, putrid, terrible water. But if you're a stranger coming through town and you're thirsty, then you drink it. What the writer of the proverb is saying is, why drink from that public cistern when you have a clean, fresh, refreshing cistern of water at home? It's the imagery of, instead of enjoying the person you're married to, why would you go out there and drink something so ugly and so filthy and so unhealthy? It's a very vivid imagery, which then moves to this statement where he says in verse 18, Rejoice in the wife of your youth. That's actually a phrase that has been a big part of my life for a long time. I realized early on when Patty and I got married that the culture is on a mission to make me dissatisfied with the woman I'm married to. This is the culture we live in. We're supposed to be dissatisfied with everything. Watch all the TV commercials. It's like you're never satisfied. You always need the next best thing. You drive a new car, you can't stand the old car, and on it goes. But it's far more serious when you're talking about a human being. And I'm supposed to keep comparing Patty to every other woman and eventually be dissatisfied and chase someone else. And to me, that was like a competition. I'm a pretty competitive person. And it's like the enemy is determined to do that with me. So it's game on. It's like, I will absolutely not let that happen. So I spent the last almost 45 years being absolutely, totally in love with the woman I'm married to. Sometimes people will say, well, you know, Pastor Clark, you and Patty, you're lucky. It's like, doesn't have anything to do with luck. It has to do with choices. Choices we made in our 20s, in our 30s, in our 40s, and 50s, and choices we still make every day. The reality is, I'm not married to anyone else. I'm married to Patty. And I love Patty. I don't care what anybody else thinks of her. I really don't care. I don't care how anyone thinks she compares with some other woman. I don't care. It's completely irrelevant to me. I love her. I love everything about her. It's like it's my choice. Now, after this many years, the fruit of that is hard to explain. I marvel at the fact that we have been together as a couple that long, and I'm still madly in love with this woman. I'm crazy in love with her. Like, what an unbelievable privilege to spend my days with someone I'm still so taken by. But it comes down to choices. It's the route I've chosen. I choose to see her that way. I choose to love her that way. I've never known anyone sexually other than Patty. I've never had even a thought to have a relationship with anybody else. I've never wanted that. When I fell for Patty, I fell hard, and I'm more in love with her today than I was 45 years ago. In our retirement, we bought a 20-foot camper, bumper pull camper. If you know anything about campers, that's real small. But there's just two of us. But I've jokingly said to quite a few people when they ask about it, it's like, you better really be in love if you're going to spend that much time in a camper that small. But I'm confident we're going to have a ball because we still really love each other. It's just so easy to let the voices of the culture make a mess of our lives. It's like, no, not going to do it. Not going to listen. This is the person I'm married. It's my choice. We don't care about all that other stuff. I don't care if you think she's a 10 or a 1. I don't care. I think she's a 10. That's my choice. And that's what he's talking about. I choose to delight in the wife of my youth. I am still intoxicated by her love. I think ultimately intimacy is about the things we go through together as a couple. All of us have stuff. All of us have ups and downs. All of us have stuff we've been through. But to go through it with someone creates a depth of intimacy that then is experienced in a sexual relationship in a deep and meaningful way. I don't have time to go into all that other than to say the most tragic things that we have gone through together are the things that have cultivated the deepest intimacy in our relationship. Things I have never shared or experienced or expressed to anyone else. That doesn't get created in the bedroom. It just gets expressed in the bedroom. Years ago, back when I was in seminary, I watched a movie of a story. I can't figure out if this story is true or not, if it's just making a point, because I've tried to sort it out and it's still confusing. But it's still a great illustration. So there was an island of people like in the Caribbean, and their currency, the way they evaluated, like if a young man wants to marry this woman, then the way that's negotiated is with livestock. It's with cows. That was their currency. So a woman was typically a 2-cow woman, a 3-cow woman, a 4-cow woman. That's the currency of the day. So there was this eligible bachelor, and he was kind of a mover, shaker, and all the girls wanted him. And he would go and trade and whatever, come back to the island. So he's back to the island, and he goes in to negotiate for the daughter of this man who was considered like a half-cow woman. She was kind of a wallflower. Nobody really cared much for her. And it's like, so you're privy to this conversation going on the outside, where everybody's trying to figure out, I mean, he could have any woman on the island he wants. Why is he going after the half-cow woman and blah, blah, blah. So they figure out it's a business deal. That's what he's doing. He's going to get her for next to nothing, and she can do his laundry and his food and everything. That's what it is. So pretty soon the father comes out of the hut, and he's smiling from ear to ear and declares that his daughter has been purchased, the dowry's been paid for 10 cows. And they're all like aghast. They're like, 10 cows? There's never been a 10-cow woman. So they don't know what to do with this. So he leaves with her, and they're gone for months. Comes back, and he's got this beautiful woman in the boat with him. So they're trying to figure out who's that and what happened to the 10-cow woman. And finally they get to shore, and she gets out, and they realize, wait a minute, that's her. So finally somebody asked, what's the deal? What happened? And his answer was, once I convinced her she really is a 10-cow woman, she became a 10-cow woman. There's so much of our core theology that's like that. If you can believe who you are in Christ is the key to living that way. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. I saw that in grad school, and I have been on a mission for 40 years to absolutely convince Patty I think she is a 10-cow woman. It's easy for me to stand on the platform and say, the issue is whether or not she believes that I really think that about her. You can ask her if you want, because people have, and I know what she'll say. She does believe that I really see her that way. It's the beauty of the relationship that God gives us. It's full of choices. You can choose to see it all differently. We also have the choice to be madly in love with the person you're married to. It's your choice. Let me pray and I'm done. Father, thanks for truth in a culture of lies. Lord, just kind of a cold, wintry weekend, yet my friends here have made an effort to come together, to learn, to grow. Lord, I pray that you would bless their efforts. You'd give them understanding. Lord, as a result of our time together, that we would grow in a relationship with our spouses in order that ultimately we would grow and deepen our love relationship with you. Lord, may that be so. In Jesus' name, amen.
Do you feel the world is broken? We do. Do you feel the shadows deepen? We do. But do you know that all the dark won't stop the light from getting through? We do. Do you wish that you could see it all made new? We do. Is all creation groaning? It is. Is a new creation coming? It is the glory of the Lord to be the light within our midst. It is. Is it good that we remind ourselves of this? It is. Is anyone worthy? Is anyone whole? Is anyone able to break the seal and open the scroll? The Lion of Judah, who conquered the grave. He is David's root and the Lamb who died to ransom the slave. Is he worthy? Is he worthy of all blessing and honor and glory? Is he worthy of this? He is. Does the Father truly love us? He does. Does the Spirit move among us? He does. And does Jesus our Messiah hold forever those he loves? He does. Does our God intend to dwell again with us? He does. Is anyone worthy? Is anyone whole? Is anyone able to break the seal and open the scroll? The Lion of Judah, who conquered the grave. He is David's root and the Lamb who died to ransom the slave. From every people and tribe, every nation and tongue, he has made us a kingdom, a priest to our God, to reign with the Son. Is he worthy? Is he worthy of all blessing and honor and glory? Is he worthy? Is he worthy? Is he worthy of this? He is.
Yes, we're talking about Jesus. He is worthy of our lives. He's worthy of our marriages. And thank you so much for sharing with us. This is a super job. Many things to think about. Maybe talk to your wife or your husband about. But thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Can we give you another hand? We just... Yeah. And may the Lord just bless your marriages as you move forward here, and have a super day. Try not to get a flat tire. It's cold out there. You are dismissed.